Bengals fans, there is absolutely no way this conversation around Cincinnati's receiver room is slowing down anytime soon. And now another name has been thrown back into the spotlight, and it is one that many fans already know very well. The interesting part here is not just the name itself, it's the timing. Because if this discussion had happened months ago, the reaction may have looked completely different than it does right now. A former All-Pro wide receiver, a respected veteran, a player with years of NFL production behind him, and someone who publicly mentioned Joe Burrow as a quarterback he'd love to play with. Sounds exciting at first, right? But once you start looking deeper, things suddenly become a lot more complicated than they appear on the surface. Before we continue, if you want to stay up to date on everything happening in the world of Bengals, don't forget to like and subscribe right now. Now, let's get down to business. A recent discussion pushed the idea that Cincinnati should pursue DeAndre Hopkins and bring him into the Bengals organization. On the surface, you can immediately understand why some people find the idea attractive. We are talking about a player who built an incredible NFL career, a three-time All-Pro player, multiple Pro Bowl appearances, and someone who spent years being one of the most dangerous receivers in football. During his prime years, he consistently produced at an elite level and established himself among the most respected receivers in the league. But here's where things begin to shift, because the conversation is not really about who DeAndre Hopkins was years ago. The real question is who DeAndre Hopkins is right now, and that changes everything. The report discussing Cincinnati's fit suggested that the Bengals may lack dependable depth behind their top receiver options. The argument was that while the team has major talent at the top of the depth chart, adding a veteran presence like Hopkins could strengthen the room and provide security behind the primary targets. Now, initially, that probably sounds reasonable. Depth matters. Injuries happen. Every NFL season turns into a survival test eventually. But once you begin examining the current situation more closely, that argument starts becoming less straightforward. Because the Bengals are not looking at the exact same receiver room they had before the draft. That matters. The draft changed things. The roster changed. And perhaps most importantly, the team's options changed. According to the discussion in the file, Kobe Young's arrival significantly altered how this potential move could be viewed. Before Cincinnati added him, there may have been stronger arguments supporting a veteran addition. But after bringing him into the picture, the situation looks different. Why? Because now there appears to be a potential replacement profile already developing inside the roster structure. The discussion specifically pointed toward Kobe Young having similarities in physical profile to T. Higgins, creating a scenario where Cincinnati may already possess internal depth solutions rather than needing to look outside the building. And that becomes an important question. If you're Cincinnati, are you trying to create opportunities for younger players to develop? Or are you trying to bring in a veteran who may immediately take some of those opportunities away? That's where things become interesting. Because the conversation doesn't stop there. Other names inside the current depth discussion were also mentioned. Andre Iosivas was acknowledged as a player who has had some struggles at times, while Mitch Tinsley received discussion surrounding previous opportunities and performances. Dante Myers was also brought up as an intriguing option, who has reportedly looked promising. Suddenly, you start looking at this receiver room differently. Instead of seeing an empty room needing immediate help, you're looking at a room that already contains several players competing for opportunities. And competition matters, especially during an off-season, because coaches need to evaluate players, front offices need answers, and young players need reps. Adding a veteran like Hopkins doesn't automatically solve problems. Sometimes it creates different questions. Now let's talk specifically about Hopkins himself. Because there is another major factor involved. Production. The discussion noted that while Hopkins had a phenomenal career, recent years have looked different from his prime seasons. Injuries and missed time have become part of the conversation, and his most recent production numbers were also discussed. Last season, he recorded 22 catches, 330 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, those numbers do not erase what he accomplished throughout his career. Not even close. But they do raise legitimate questions. Can he still consistently separate? Can he still create enough impact within a passing offense? Can he still provide meaningful production over an entire season? Can he still become a difference maker? Those are questions every front office would have to ask, especially when evaluating a player entering his age 34 season. But then, another detail enters the picture and suddenly makes this conversation interesting again. Money. Because according to the discussion, a move like this would not necessarily carry a major financial burden. A potential deal around veteran minimum territory was mentioned, with around $1.5 million discussed as a possibility. Now, suddenly, things become more difficult. Because if a move costs very little, if financial risk stays low, if there are limited long-term consequences, then people naturally begin asking, why not? And honestly, that's probably the strongest argument supporting the move. Low risk, potential upside, veteran experience. That's not nothing. Not at all. Even if Hopkins no longer resembles his peak form, adding a player with his experience level can still provide value under the right circumstances. But then we circle back once again to the same issue. Where exactly does he fit? Because if the receiver room remains healthy, where are the opportunities coming from? How much playing time would realistically exist? Would younger players still get opportunities? Would Hopkins become an occasional rotational option? Would he become a depth insurance piece? Those questions become harder to answer. The discussion also touched on Hopkins, mentioning Joe Burrow as a quarterback he would enjoy playing with. That naturally fueled speculation and created additional excitement around the idea. There was also mention of their appearance together at the Fanatic Flag Football Classic, adding another element for people to talk about. But even there, no assumptions were made. No conclusions were drawn. No guarantees suggested. Only questions. Because speculation always moves faster than reality during the off-season. And right now, this feels more like an interesting conversation than a clear direction. When you step back and look at the full picture, this really comes down to one central question. Do the Bengals truly have a receiver depth problem? Because if the answer is yes, adding a proven veteran suddenly looks attractive. But if the answer is no, and if the organization believes in the younger talent already inside the building, then bringing in Hopkins becomes much harder to justify. And that's why this conversation has become so fascinating. Because there are reasonable arguments on both sides. There's the proven veteran side, there's the youth development side, there's the low-risk contract argument, there's the opportunity cost argument, and right now, none of those questions seem fully answered. Bengals fans, now I want to hear from you. If Cincinnati had the opportunity to bring in DeAndre Hopkins on a low-cost deal, would you do it? Do you believe the Bengals need more depth at wide receiver, or do you think the younger players already on the roster deserve those opportunities? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this debate is definitely not ending anytime soon. If you enjoyed this update and want non-stop Bengals coverage all off-season long, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe right now. We're getting into every rumor, every roster move, every storyline, and every big development surrounding Cincinnati as it happens. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Join the community and be part of the conversation. Who Dey?